Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Weldon Angelos, founder of the Weldon Project and its initiative, Mission Green, a leading voice in the cannabis clemency, expungement, and pardons for people currently or formerly incarcerated for nonviolent cannabis-related offenses. Weldon knows this issue firsthand as he founded the organization after serving 13 years of a 55-year sentence. His story and advocacy has become a powerful catalyst for change in the space, and so we're excited to spend some time and sit down and talk through where cannabis reform stands today and where it's possibly headed in the future. So with all that said, Weldon, thanks so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, then, so I did want to just kind of start there. I know you've done so much for cannabis reform and really have continued to push and change. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of why this moment is so important to kind of really have this front of mind as an issue for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have an opportunity to get something done, an opportunity we haven't had in a long time. The president was, very clear on what he planned to do when he became president. And President Trump, no matter what you think about him, is a man of his word. And so I think because of this opportunity, we need to take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So being able to do it more now than ever, because that was a question I was going to ask is, does now feel different than the previous, few years, 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, however long in terms of, how long you've been kind of fighting this fight ultimately?
Yeah, it does, especially, the last president, Biden, he wasn't really sincere on the issue. So we were all just kind of wondering if he was going to come through. Unfortunately, he didn't, but it wasn't surprising because, he's always been a drug warrior. And we can't say that really about President Trump. He's just a different animal. He's not a political figure. I guess he is now, but he's not a traditional politician. He doesn't think like a traditional politician. So I definitely feel like, change is coming and coming pretty soon.
Very interesting. And then I guess, yeah, in terms of kind of comparing the previous administration, maybe with the current one, I know there have been a lot of kind of holdups around Biden, just because he again had kind of drug related things in his past and history. But I know Trump is different because he doesn't use cannabis. Do you need to be someone who uses and engages with the plant directly to be somebody that's supportive? What's sort of your thought there for people who are worried?
No, not at all. I just think he has to understand, this is an issue that will help him and the Republican Party. It's actually a states' rights issue. This is a conservative issue, and a lot of conservatives don't embrace it because they don't like it. But you can't be conservative and states' rights on one issue, but not the other. And so I think President Trump understands that the Republican Party needs to, broaden. They need to bring other people in their tent, and this is a popular issue that will, help with that. So I definitely think President Trump sees that, even when other Republicans don't.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, then, so in terms of getting something done and having a real impact, I know you've obviously been working, but kind of spearheading a team to make progress on that. But would love to hear about, how to tackle this issue. Can one person kind of drive it home? Does it take a team? What's sort of the approach?
Yeah, it definitely takes a team. And I think that's why, I wanted Mike and these other athletes to step up and help us. This is on President Trump's radar, and he's, plans on coming through with it, but he wants to see more support for it from Republicans, from the public. And that's really why, we reached out to Mike and these other athletes to step up and use their voice. And I think it's working.
Yeah, I'd love to zoom out and talk about that in a little more depth, because I know obviously people who are following the world of cannabis or maybe who are watching Fox and Friends might be aware of what that open letter was and kind of the impact and the push that you, Mike Tyson, and others have kind of put behind and put towards President Trump. But can you kind of tell us high level kind of what that was, how that came together, and kind of the aims?
Yeah, so we wanted to do something to really just, piggyback on President Trump's statements during the election. So we sent it around to pretty much all the, entertainers that are in that I know, that other people know, that's been working on this letter. We got a decent group of people to sign on to it. And basically the letter highlights everything President Trump talked about previously or in his last administration. It highlights the need for clemency for people with cannabis offenses. President Trump on the campaign trail said that it doesn't make sense to have people in jail for cannabis since it's legal in most of the states. He talked about rescheduling, and he talked about banking for cannabis companies. And, right now, President Trump can take care of both of them with the sign of his pen. Like he can, do an executive order to release all the people in prison for cannabis. But I think even easier is the rescheduling aspect of it. Now, I'm a big supporter of descheduling. I want to see the plant descheduled. I just don't think we're there, and I don't feel like we should hold progress just until we get everything we want. It just doesn't work that way. And this is a step in the right direction. We need to take it. We need to get a win. Nothing has moved in so long, and if Schedule 3 is the first step, we need to take it.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. Just from looking at, I know with the previous administration, there was the HHS review process for rescheduling. And I do think reading a lot of the comments there, it does seem like a lot of people were pro, rescheduling, but only as kind of a stepping stone as well to say, we hope this does go further in the future. But again, like you're saying, that incremental step makes a huge difference in the meantime. And obviously, of course, the expungement element is really important. I think as somebody who obviously has gone through the process of getting a pardon and everything from Trump, how much does that sort of strengthen your view in terms of what he could do? And then are there any changes between when that happened and kind of now? Is there any sense that he's changed his
Can
thoughts
you,
or
sorry, can you state the question over again?
no, that was a long question. Totally
Okay.
fair. I was just asking, just because you had the history of sort of the pardon with Trump, how does that kind of inform, because you have a much closer connection and like personal story and tie-in, I think, with that element. I'm getting a long question again. Basically, my point is you've gotten the pardon from Trump. How does that tie into how you view his openness to give pardons in the future? And kind of,
Yeah, well, I got to know the Trump administration last time. I actually started working with President Trump in early 2018. I was invited to the White House to talk about the First Step Act. And I kept working with the White House on that bill. And when that bill passed, we started working on clemency. And so I was working with Ivanka Trump, with Alice Johnson, with other Trump staffers. And because of the work I did with the White House, President Trump issued me a full pardon. And I had a lot of people supporting that, including Mike Lee and Rand Paul. And I also, while working with the Trump administration, I heard that Trump was interested in supporting States Act back then. And that's how I kind of started understanding that President Trump's views on cannabis. So when he was reelected, I'm like, okay, now we have an opportunity to get what we could have got done back then. Now,
yeah, again, I think it's one of those better late than never kind of things. Ultimately, in terms of it is definitely overdue, but getting something done now is better than getting it done later. So that makes a big difference. In
absolutely.
terms of, I guess, in terms of rallying together with all of these celebrities, is there anything important in terms of being able to speak kind of in Trump's language? I know he's definitely comes from the world of media and understands how a good story can kind of tie into making popular decisions. What would you say in terms of the type of celebrities, advocates that you've gotten together to make this push towards Trump? How much does that come into play as being important with speaking his language kind of ultimately?
Yeah, I think a lot. For one, Mike Tyson is using his story where cannabis completely changed his life, but also he's a cannabis entrepreneur and President Trump understands business language. And so Tyson can explain to him how his company is struggling because of the current federal policies. And so I think, that is appealing to President Trump. And that's sort of why we rallied around Mike to be one of the messengers, because he can tell his story, not only how cannabis helped him personally, but how he has a cannabis business and how his business could be doing so much better, without 280E, without restrictions to banking.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. Again, a lot of different angles. I feel like it is the current state of cannabis law, I think, has been an issue for a long time with a relatively easy solution across a lot of fronts, whether it's kind of economic, whether it's just sort of personal use, whether it's medical, all those things can be really important. So again, I think that there are a lot of reasons to make a change, and hopefully we finally see that happen. So again, that's great. In terms of communicating with the new administration, it sounds like you have, had contact with people in the administration and be able to kind of talk with them. Have any of those conversations changed at all in terms of tone, or is it all relatively kind of the same and kind of still that education, communication?
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk about everything and all my conversations, but there's definitely, it's a different tone than the last administration. Obviously, they were listening to us, but this administration seems more open to actually getting something done.
Yep, I think that makes sense. Well, then, so in the meantime, as we're waiting for something to happen and things to change, and you're working to make things change, can you tell us a little bit again about Mission Green and kind of what you're doing on the ground right now, and what's been kind of new in that front?
Yeah, I mean, nothing really new. We're still fighting to get people out of jail, trying to make people whole again, trying to reform cannabis policies. It's definitely a tough fight, especially trying to change federal law. It's the toughest fight I've ever had because it's Congress doesn't like to do anything, especially something new like cannabis reform. And so we've been really focusing our attention on the executive branch. Because President Trump is willing to do things and he is willing to let people out of jail, so really, all of our focus has sort of shifted from Congress to the White House.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then I guess also just from people who are following it from an industry perspective, I know you've kind of had several partnerships with a lot of the multi-state operators. I think a new one you were at the Benzinga conference doing a panel, which was great with Kim Rivers and Todd Harrison. Sounds like a new partnership there, which is again great to kind of find that additional support. Can you talk us through that at a high level in terms of how those came to be and kind of what it means for Mission Green?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I used to have a different view of the industry when I was first getting into the advocacy after I got out of prison, but I got to meet a lot of good people and understand that it's important for the industry to succeed. The first one was, meeting Verano and all the good people there. But since then, Cresco has stepped up and recently Trulieve has stepped up and started the Roundup program. And so we're grateful for them and USCR for, stepping up to support our mission. I think a lot of them understand that we're really doing the work. We're not just a PR company. We're not out there just promoting ourselves. We're actually on the ground and making things happen.
Yeah, no, again, I think that's the most important thing. And again, I feel like there's a sense of between the industry, between advocates that are working for it, kind of a finding a lot of common ground lately in terms of just trying to get something that's very common sense done. Again, working towards more later, but just trying to have that shared push, that shared effort and kind of shared message, which feels important and feels different than in previous years. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
That's great. Awesome. Okay. Well, then in terms of other people who are out there, maybe people who are watching and want to get involved, support what you're doing and your work, A, how can they kind of follow along? And then B, how can they kind of support?
Yeah, well, we definitely can't do anything without funding. We need resources. And so you can go to our website, theweldonproject.org. You can donate or you can follow us on social media and just share our stories, follow our content, and just support us overall.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, again, Weldon, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. A lot of very interesting things happening lately and appreciate, again, ultimately all the work in the end. So yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And we
Thank
will
you.
see you next time. Thanks so much.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.